What if I told you that some of the oldest religious poetry in human history could actually be read as a series of highly sophisticated geopolitical intelligence briefs? We usually think of the biblical Psalms as purely spiritual or liturgical. But if you look closely at Psalms 80 through 84, you aren't just reading prayers. You are looking at a nation grappling with existential threats, internal collapse, and shifting regional alliances. Today, we are stripping away the traditional theological lens and analyzing these texts using modern strategic frameworks. We are talking SWOT analyses, pestle, game theory, and even spear assessments. It sounds wild, but the strategic insights hidden in these ancient pages might surprise you.
It is not wild at all when you consider the historical context. These chapters, mostly attributed to the sons of Asaph, were written during times of intense national crisis. If you treat them as intelligence reports, they outline a classic survival scenario. Let's start with a pestle analysis to set the scene. Politically, the nation is fragmented and facing external aggression. Socially, there is a massive crisis of faith and law. Legally, as we see in Psalm 82, the justice system is completely compromised. The judges, who are supposed to protect the vulnerable, are taking bribes and favoring the wicked. This creates a massive internal vulnerability before we even look at external military threats.
That legal collapse in Psalm 82 is fascinating because it directly impacts the internal stability. If we run a SWOT analysis on the nation's position here, their internal weakness is clearly this systemic corruption. But what about their strengths? In these texts, their primary strength is presented as their historical covenant and identity, essentially, their unique relationship with a supreme power. But how does that translate into a modern strategic framework like most? What is their actual mission and strategy?
The mission, or the most framework's M, is national restoration and survival. In Psalm 80, the objective is clear. They need to secure their borders and revive their agricultural and economic base, which is metaphorically described as a ravaged vine. The strategy they choose is not to build immediate military alliances with neighboring empires, but rather to align their internal behavior with their foundational laws. The tactics, which we see in Psalm 81, involve public communication, historical reminders, and a call to national unity. They are trying to rebuild social cohesion from the ground up because they realize a divided, corrupt society cannot survive a foreign invasion.
So, they are focusing on internal alignment before facing external threats. But the external threats are massive. Let's talk about Psalm 83. This reads like a classic intelligence report on a hostile coalition. 10 different regional groups, Edom, Ishmael, Moab, Ammon, Amalek, and others, have formed an alliance to completely wipe Israel off the map. If we apply a spear analysis here looking at the social, political, economic, actionable, and resource-based dimensions, the threat is highly actionable and resource-rich. The coalition has geographic encirclement and shared economic incentives to control the trade routes. How does a small, isolated state respond to that kind of overwhelming force?
This is where game theory becomes incredibly useful to explain the decisions made in the text. In game theory, we often look at cooperative versus non-cooperative games. The surrounding nations are playing a zero-sum game. For them, Israel's total destruction is the optimal payoff because it redistributes land and resources. Israel, on the other hand, is trying to change the rules of the game. They cannot win a direct, symmetric military conflict against a 10-nation coalition. So, their justification for calling on divine intervention is actually a strategic attempt to introduce a dominant, non-linear variable into the payoff matrix. By framing their survival as a test of the divine reputation, they attempt to deter the coalition through psychological warfare and perceived existential risk.
It is like a deterrent strategy. They are trying to convince the enemy that the cost of attacking is infinitely high because they are not just fighting a small nation, but the cosmic creator. It is a high-stakes bluff if you don't believe, but a rational strategic move when you have no other cards to play. Speaking of deep strategic analysis and unpacking complex topics, this is exactly the kind of deep dive we love to explore. If you enjoy looking at the world through different lenses, whether it is dissecting historical strategies, understanding global security, or analyzing modern trends, you should check out our partner podcast, The New Sentinel.
Absolutely. The New Sentinel is a fantastic show dedicated to providing in-depth discussions on a wide array of topics. They cover everything from the strategic intricacies of military operations and global security to the glitz, glamour, and social impacts of pop culture. Each episode is thoughtfully crafted to offer listeners a comprehensive understanding of the subject matter, featuring expert interviews, detailed analysis, and engaging storytelling.
Whether you are a pop culture enthusiast or someone with a keen interest in global geopolitics, The New Sentinel has something for everyone. It is the perfect companion to the kind of analytical thinking we are doing today. So, make sure to tune in, view, subscribe, comment, and post an inquiry to stay informed and entertained. You won't regret adding it to your weekly rotation.
Now, going back to our analysis, let's look at the transition from the panic of Psalm 83 to the peacefulness of Psalm 84. Strategically, this transition is highly significant. Psalm 83 is all about war, coalitions, and existential dread. Psalm 84 suddenly shifts to a deep longing for the sanctuary, the temple, and a place of peace. From a psychological operations perspective, why do you think these two are placed next to each other?
It is about maintaining morale and defining the ultimate objective. If Psalm 83 is the threat assessment, Psalm 84 is the vision of the post-war state. It defines what they are fighting to protect. The sanctuary isn't just a building. It represents stability, safety, and a functional society where even the sparrow can find a nest. In strategic terms, you cannot motivate a population to fight a brutal defensive war if you only show them the threat. You must also show them the value of the peace they are trying to preserve. It is the ultimate justification for their defensive strategy.
That is a great point. In any conflict, the side that maintains a clear vision of peace and recovery usually has higher resilience. If we look at the spear analysis again, the resource and social components in Psalm 84 are all about replenishing the psychological capital of the people. They talk about going from strength to strength. It is an acknowledgement that physical resources are limited, but moral and spiritual endurance can be multiplied.
It really makes you think about how little human conflict has changed over 3,000 years. The tools and the technology are different, but the strategic dilemmas remain the same. You still have corruption weakening states from within, hostile coalitions forming to shift regional power dynamics, and the constant need for societies to find a unifying narrative to survive.
Exactly. And when you apply these analytical frameworks like SWOT or game theory to ancient texts, it demystifies them. It shows that the writers were not just writing poetry in a vacuum. They were highly observant actors trying to navigate a brutal, unforgiving geopolitical landscape. They understood the balance of power, the importance of rule of law, and the necessity of strategic communication.
As we wrap up today's analysis, we are left with a compelling question for our listeners to ponder. When we look at our modern world, with its complex global alliances and internal political divisions, are we relying too much on our technological strengths while ignoring the systemic internal weaknesses that historically bring down great societies? Perhaps the ancient strategist who wrote these chapters had a clearer view of national security than many of our contemporary leaders. Think about that the next time you look at a modern conflict map. Thank you for diving deep with us today. Keep analyzing, keep questioning, and we will see you next time.